welcome to JDG Sport. It's episode 11 this week, a special feature-length episode as we do once a month. This month I've caught up with Sam Neter from HoopsFix. Now, HoopsFix is an independent basketball publication. Sam, really passionate guy, really passionate about basketball. I've been wanting to do this for quite a while with him because there's a load of issues in basketball in media and how it portrays itself. So I wanted to catch up with Sam and just bend his ear a little bit, give some of my impressions across to him and find out his thoughts on where he saw basketball going. And also someone just like me who'd followed their passion and set something up and is able to make it a full-time job to a degree. So I speak with Sam. It's about half an hour long. Hope you enjoy it. It follows this. So we've got a feature-length JDG Sport video this month. It's with Sam Neter from HoopsFix, basketball guru, basketball. He's the man of basketball media. I know he's laughing there, but you are, Sam, aren't you?
I don't know if I'd go that far. But
tell us a bit more about. Give us a bit more about you and what you do, and obviously all the wonderful things you do in basketball.
Yeah, so obviously I run British basketball website, hoopsfix.com. It's UK's largest basketball site. We cover sort of every level of the game from juniors all the way through to seniors. We do events, so we've got the HoopsFix All-Star Classic, which is kind of our annual showcase of the best junior players in the country every year in Brixton. And I guess it's kind of just trying to do everything we can to help British basketball reach its potential, primarily as a media platform. So I guess that's the main focus of what I'm trying to do.
Incredible depth that you offer as well. Like you say, you do all the juniors, you do obviously some of the pro stuff, you do Brits abroad and all that sort of thing. A hell of a lot of time must have gone into it over the years.
I mean, yeah, it's crazy to think that we're 10 years in now, which even now, when I look back on it, I'm just like, I can't believe that the time has flown. And yeah, in terms of how long that has taken and the effort that's taken, it's crazy. That's been juggling it with a job for the first 4 years, 3-4 years, doing it evenings and weekends. And then from 2012 was when I made the transition into going full-time. And I've been full-time ever since, which is kind of like a balance from, I have to freelance. I freelance with basketball teams and organisations around their digital content, and that's essentially what subsidises HoopsFix, because it doesn't actually make that much money sort of directly. But yeah, it's a lot of hours, man. And you know what basketball schedules are like. It's weekends, it's evenings. It's very, very antisocial. So yeah, it's definitely been a huge grind.
I suppose it's just lucky that they don't play 80-odd games like in the NBA, I suppose, because that'd make it even worse.
Yeah, 100%. That's a blessing. It is a blessing.
What made you start it in the first place?
Well, basically, I mean, I used to play, first of all, when I was younger. That was when I was 14, 15 was when I kind of got the bug. And it was my life from 14, 15 through until early 20s, I would say I was playing. And then when I graduated from university, I always knew that I wanted to do my own thing. I never had any intention of sort of working for anyone else. And the original plan was to set up late night scrimmages for kids on the street. That was, as it is now actually, but knife crime was this sort of the hot topic, and you've seen a lot of schemes in the States where they've done sort of late night basketball runs and scrimmages. And my whole thing was let's do late night scrimmages. And then to raise awareness of that and bring kids in, we would have a website, and the website would have cool content on it. And then when people go on the website and they read the content or they watch the videos, they'll see on the side, we've got a scrimmage this week. That was the plan. And then so I went to Future Stars in 2009, which was international tournament that Jack Majewski used to run, under 18. That would have that year was, it's pretty stacked. There was, England under 18s were playing, but then Italy, Spain, France used to play in it. They've had Croatia. They have a lot of sort of powerhouse European nations. And so I filmed Future Stars. I put it on YouTube. that year, Ryan Richards was actually playing for the under 18s. Obviously, he was at that time one of the hottest sort of prospects in Europe, I would say. And I put it on YouTube, and I sort of, it did like a few thousand views pretty quickly, and I kind of got these messages from people being like, "Oh, like, what else are you going to be covering? Like, where else are you going to be? Are you coming to this? Are you coming to that?" And I just kind of thought, do you know what? Maybe this is what I should be doing instead. I think, well, as you know, like, the sport historically has always struggled with media coverage in this country. For me, growing up, I had no idea about anything to do with British basketball, outside of my immediate friends and my immediate teams and leagues that I played in. But in terms of things on a wider scale, I didn't really follow the BBL. I had a local team, Brighton Bears existed back then, so I went and watched them a few times, but didn't really know what was going on. Didn't know that we had players in the NBA, didn't know that we had players playing at the highest levels in Europe, didn't know that we had juniors in Europe signing contracts. Like, there was just so much stuff that I had no clue about. And of course, now I even when I started out, I sometimes look back, because all those articles are still online, from those days, and I cringe at sort of my lack of knowledge and how much I had no clue. But of course, over the years, when you're embedded in it, it's almost like the more you know, the more you realise you don't know. And I just thought this is what I should be doing instead. So I kind of like dropped the whole scrimmage idea. Relaunched the site with just a focus on being a sort of news content platform, media platform. That was January 1st, 2010. So even though the concept was around in the summer of 2009, so this summer would actually be 10 years. That was when I filmed my first tournament. January 1st, 2010 was when actually like HoopsFix sort of as it is launched.
It's interesting you mentioned some of that stuff around scrimmage, because basketball, and I want to talk about this in a bit more depth later on, but basketball is very ingrained into the community, but also, you mentioned knife crime and stuff like that. It's a very, it's a sport maybe like no other that can get into communities that maybe other sports can't. And in some ways, should that be more of a priority to basketball? Is that why people always think of sport, think of professional sport and commercial sport, but is the growth of the professional commercial sport, should it be tied closer into helping these communities a bit more?
I think using that as the lever definitely could be capitalised on. I think it is in many ways it's always pointed to, especially to get sort of the public funding and stuff. But as you know, the way that sport is funded in this country, there's quite a distinct line between the sort of the participation grassroots stuff and then the elite stuff. To be honest, I don't really think that the grassroots funding is as much of an issue as the elite funding as we've seen sort of recently. Even when I look at our event, the HoopsFix All-Star Classic, there is no public funding pot that applies to fund any type of event for the top players in the country. Like, I've looked through so much stuff. Meanwhile, and this is potentially what we're going to do this year to be able to actually tap into some of that money, if we were to run a 6 to 8 week program in the run up to it for a certain age group, ticking certain social intervention boxes, there's pots and pots and pots of it. So I mean, I think that it's definitely something that should be used, because of course when I look at the impact that it had on, I didn't have a bad upbringing or anything, but in terms of the impact that sport and basketball gave to me in terms of working with others and leadership and discipline and all that, it had a massive impact on kind of like my life and who I am as a person and how I navigate through sort of my own journey now. So I think to discount the impact that it can have away from the court would be silly. So it definitely should be used. But I do think also that there is almost an over-reliance on looking for government handouts, especially when I always say, like, if I was UK Sport or Sport England and I looked at the governing bodies and I look at the results that they've had or what they're getting, and I don't mean just the win and loss results, I mean the growth of sport in this country and kind of the impact they're having, would I fund them? I don't know if I would. And so even though, it's very easy to say we should have more money, and I think objectively, I went into it in detail with Dan Routledge on the podcast, and I think he made a very, very convincing and strong argument with some really nice points. Even though, of course, like, objectively, it is massively underfunded. We as a sport need to be doing better, and that doesn't mean that we don't deserve any money because we're shit. Excuse my language. We're not very good, but yeah, like the sport isn't where it should be, even with the current resource that it does have.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, you know, obviously I'm not a basketball person as per se as like you are. I've worked across a number of sports, and I just happen to have been able to work in the BBL for a few years and fallen in love with it, so to speak. What is it about the lack of commercial funding? Why do you think sponsors aren't attracted to basketball as maybe they are with other sports?
It's a couple of things. I think one, and this links into the government funding thing as well. I just don't think there are that many people that work for brands that care about basketball. Just because basketball isn't culturally sort of hasn't penetrated the minds of most people like other sports have. You know, if I was to get a job with a Nike, that's an Under Armour or whatever, when I'm given a marketing budget, I'm going to look at basketball because I love basketball. I know people within that space. I know that I can get a good return. Like, if you don't have those people, those decision makers on the inside, for sure, like, that is definitely a barrier, and I do think that is part of the problem. But then also, I just don't think that we as a sport do a very good job of actually putting across the value proposition. You know, like it's up to us to be able to show this is what your money can do, and rather than saying, okay, we want you to give us some money because we're doing really good things and we're helping people, it's actually, well, now these are businesses, and if they're sponsoring you, they want a return on that. So you need to be able to show them, okay, you're going to give me however many hundreds, thousands, whatever, and as a result of that, we're going to give you this many eyeballs, we're going to give you this many access to this many people, this many emails, and we'll be able to, you can give us a tracking link so that we can actually directly attribute sales to awareness, and you can track that. It's that kind of thing. I think that when I look at what I've been, and this is much smaller scale, and I'm well aware of that, but like the fact that the HoopsFix All-Star Classic can raise commercial money, and we're actually, and this hasn't been announced yet, but we've obviously agreed a deal with Nike for this year's event, and we're in the process of drawing up a 3-year deal with them. The fact that can happen, and then we have a host of other sort of commercial partners. Molten have obviously been one of the biggest backers from day one. We had Stance involved loosely last year, and they did say that they wanted to sort of make a more formal agreement moving forward. We've been talking to New Era this year as well. I do think part of it just comes down to actually putting in the effort to make it happen. I had a message from someone the other day that just said, we had a parent from our team that has raised £1,500 for our team for the season, like just by actually, picking up the phone and making the calls. Maybe it is all. I'm so aware that it is always easier to criticise from the outside, and it's always easier to say they should be doing this, they should be doing that. But that there is part of me that's like, yeah. One of the issues is the fact that within the organisations, they're just not that interested because they just don't know basketball. But two, we don't package the sport very well to be able to say this is what you're going to get access to. And then three, actually putting in the effort to have a well-polished deck, to know your numbers, to have your metrics, your data, to be able to show this is what you can get as a result of it. Like, it'd be interesting to know like what BBL teams are doing right now, whether they can say we've got a case study of that we work with this brand, they put in this much money and this is the return. And the other thing is just the perception of how the sport looks, and I think that is one of the biggest things that really frustrates me, that there are simple things that could be done that make the game day presentation look so much more professional than it is. Case in point, last night, London Lions versus London City Royals at the Copper Box, one of the best arenas in the country, and the scoreboard goes down. The scoreboard's not working. So what happens? On either corner of the court, we've got someone operating a flipboard score chart, and that's just so typical of like British basketball, and people come to me, it's like, this is funny, this is just exactly how it is. And it's like it's almost expected, like it's an ongoing joke about just the I guess the lack of professionalism there is sometimes. That there are mistakes that happen, but there are also things that just shouldn't happen. Personal bugbear of mine and this again, the same situation last night, is that when games are being broadcast, you feel the opposite stand to the one that the camera's filming on. So the background of the shot that's being broadcast to the world clearly looks like it's packed, even if it's not. And I don't know why teams don't do this, but like London City Royals, guilty of it. Like, obviously they don't get great attendance, but they still don't fill the one side opposite to the camera. And London Lions the same thing. It's like they could put everyone on one side, and then all of a sudden your broadcast looks like it's somewhat of a packed house. Just things like that, where it's just simple things that just make such a difference. And then also, the other part of that is you have to have media partners, like, for you to get the numbers, the exposure that the sponsors are interested in, like to have the local newspaper covering you every single week, ideally local news station, and even better, getting national press coverage. Those are the kind of things that make a huge difference. We're, in terms of budget for this year's event, like, I want to put money towards someone specifically for PR to do the best job possible to get us as much coverage as possible, so we can clip it all, and then next year we can say, we're in this paper, we're on this website, we did this were the views. So we've got all the data to be able to show to any potential commercial partners.
Yeah, I mean, professionalism is an interesting word, because I do think basketball has a little bit of an awkward, because of its nature and the fact that it's played in leisure centres and stuff like that. It's very awkward when you've got fans and sponsors potentially walking through reception, and then you've got a couple of girls coming out with wet hair because they've been swimming. You had a recent episode on HoopsFix with Paul Blake from Newcastle, and of course they've got this fantastic new facility. Is that now the benchmark for British basketball? My opinion is, when I've been there and when I've seen games, is that this is what British basketball should look like.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can see, like, obviously Leicester were the first, really the first. I think Worcester's a bit of a funny one, because it's kind of like, it is, but it isn't as well. It's not quite the same, because it's part of a university and stuff. But yeah, Leicester and Newcastle, when you look at the things that they can do now, Blake said on the podcast the difference. One of the things I asked him was the difference between a typical game night in Sports Central compared to at Newcastle Eagles Community Arena. I think he said revenues are up 30%, 30 to 50% across the games that he's at so far. That's not an insignificant difference. Like, that is a huge difference, and the money that is going to give them. And again, he pointed to the fact that they've now got this budget which they didn't have before, which they could potentially use to promote. So that you can see that it does fix a huge problem. And then, yeah, for sure, the perception of just how it looks, like the fact they have their logo lit up on the side of the building, it just looks so slick. And again, as Blake said, they're right next to a road which is full of traffic all day. People are driving past every single day, and if they didn't hear about the Eagles before, they do now. And it's like, oh, what are the Newcastle Eagles? Oh, I'm going to Google. And the fact they have the big home, like, the facilities are a huge piece of the puzzle. And I think everyone knows that. We've discussed it for years, what difference it can make. I don't think it's the only answer, but 100% that is what every professional team in this country should be aspiring to.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about the arena on the outside, because I do think that's actually something that's massively underrated, because, you go past a football stadium and it's like, oh, that's Arsenal's ground, or that's Boreham Wood's ground, or whoever it might be. Whereas you don't get that with basketball by and large, because it's just a nondescript leisure centre or arena that's used for multiple other things. Whereas now Newcastle have got that. You drive past it and it looks mega. And to be honest, I'm really impressed that they've invested and focused in on that, because I know there'll be plenty of clubs who might build arenas that may not even think of something like that.
Yeah, 100%. Leicester's arena actually doesn't have. I'm almost certain it doesn't have the Riders logo big on the outside.
No,
anywhere.
there's like a little signpost outside, like a road sign almost, that's got a few little logos on. But yeah, there's nothing
big on the side of the building. Yeah, and then they obviously sold the naming rights to the Morningside. It's called the Morningside Arena now, isn't it? So I think that's the bigger thing at the top, which, I mean, that's obviously worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm surprised they haven't. Maybe that's something they'll do in the future.
I mean, to be fair, it's a bit out of the. It's not. Yeah. It's a bit behind the scenes, isn't it?
Estate, as opposed to being on a main road.
Interesting, obviously, talk about a few things there. I've actually sat in meetings with other sports where they've used basketball as an example in terms of how high basketball's participation is and how that doesn't equate to success. which is a really interesting sort of thought process. Why do you think that is? You know, basketball's I think it's second most participated sport amongst teenagers. Is it the whole NBA thing? Is it because the elite in basketball isn't in this country, whereas, you know, in many other sports the elite is in this country?
Well, I think part of it is that the participation rate is huge at a young level, but actually the older you get, the more it drops, right? There's a huge dropout rate at sort of 17, 18 years old, which is pretty much when kids finish education. And again, sort of Rowdish pointed to that in the interview that I did with him. But yeah, that dropout rate is definitely one of the things that really affects the game. And for adults to play basketball casually, recreationally, or older, sort of, you know, when you get from the 19 to sort of early 20s range, it's hugely more challenging to do. So that's part of the problem. And then, yeah, of course, the fact that we have so many players, well, pretty much all of our best players leave as young as they can, and then we don't see them for years. That is definitely another part of the problem. It would be interesting to see what difference having the Lions and the Royals being successful with such a British core, whether that translates over time. I mean, it's hard to measure, but I don't think anyone would say that, you know, the Royals bringing back the players that they brought back this season is a bad thing. I think, if anything, that's a hugely positive thing for the league, and ideally for sort of increasing the number of kids that we have aspiring to, you know, become professional basketball players. But yeah, I just think when you know, when I look at myself, I was exactly the same. Me and my friends, we all played every day when we were growing up, and then the moment you get a bit older and you've got to get a job and you're not in school and stuff, it's like real world takes over. And I think that's the other thing with being a professional. It's like, well, if you're not making the NBA and you're playing, I don't know, 4th, 5th division in Germany, and you're getting a house and €200 a month, you're probably at some point going to be like, do you know what, like, I've done this for a year or two, like, really I could go and work in corporate and earn 25, 30 grand a year and sort of set myself up for a better future. And again, that's the thing with the BBL, isn't it? Like, how many BBL players do we have that are trying to balance that also have a job? You know, there are ones that do, and so that is another massive issue. So yeah, like, it is definitely, like, talking about all this stuff is one of them things where I always say, like, no one knows the answers. Like, you know, if we did, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now. And there's been plenty of smart people that have come into the sport and said, okay, you know, like, I'm going to work this out, I've got it, you know, and obviously nothing changes. So it's not an easy question to answer, and I don't know the answers. You know, all I can say is what I think. But yeah, I've got no idea why. Well, we have ideas, but we don't actually know why. You know, with such a wide participation base, why we don't have more success. Why we're not competing at the, you know, we should be in Division A at every age group, boys and girls, every single year. You know, and that comes down to all the stuff that people always talk about, the coaching, the age that we start. You know, a lot of players start very, very young. Obviously, Basketball England have recently announced this Slam Jam thing that is focusing on 7 to 11-year-olds, which is starting players a lot younger. But most players, you know, there's a lot of players that start really late. I always point to the fact that Joel Freeland didn't start playing basketball until he was 17, and then was getting drafted like 2-3 years later. That's just ridiculous. You know, you think if we had all of these guys starting when they were 2-3 years old, a ball in their hands with a good coach, you know, being taught to play the right way, being taught high basketball IQ, basketball smarts, because that's realistically that is where we're behind, right? It would make a massive difference. So yeah, like, you know, coaching, facilities, how much it costs to play, the weather, which means you can't play outside as much because it is freaking freezing. Yeah,
it's interesting you say about the weather, because I always think that the weather in this country points towards why basketball should be more successful, because I sort of think, well, people play if you could play inside, but then I suppose that, do you know what I mean? An indoor sport for people to watch an indoor sport professionally is more attractive, you'd like to think, than to watch, say, you know, football or rugby, for instance, in the winter. But then, like you say, the problem is the facility cost and all that palaver. We talk about media coverage, and, you know, we'll go into that in a little bit, but is it as simple as if British basketball had a load more media coverage that things would be okay, or is it the fact that you've got to fix all of these issues? You know, and it's very and is that why basketball's not getting anywhere? Because it's got to fix the funding issue, it's got to fix the participation issue, it's got to fix the facilities issue.
Yeah, for me, it's a holistic approach. There's no one single thing that would change everything. Everything needs to be done, or certain things need to be done at the same time, at the same level. You could put a facility in the middle of nowhere, but actually, if you don't have the good people to run it, that are going to put in the time and the effort and be there long term to develop the area, the local community, the facility is going to make no difference. On the same basis, like we've seen with GB, you can be given 20 million over the course of however many years, and at the end of it have nothing to show for it. So it's, I always say, because one of the questions I get asked a lot is, if you were to change one thing, what would it be? And the one thing I always say is the people in charge. Like, for me, it's like if you hire the right people and you put the right people in the right positions, that's where the sport would flourish, because we have enough, and this is one of the revelations for me doing the podcast, is that, I sit down these people from 20, 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and ask them about their experiences, and you just realize there is so much untapped knowledge within the game in this country that, could be, well, should be capitalized on to help push the game forward. I feel like because we have such a lack of documented history, we don't learn from our mistakes, and we end up doing the same thing. You think, I had Roger Hosanna, who obviously built Hosanna Sportswear independently, with 50 grand of his own money, built a business independently to £500,000 turnover, like commercial revenue, like with no handouts, no nothing, and to think that then he is pretty much checked out from the game for the last 10 years, when the game struggles with basically exactly what he's an expert at. He had commercial deals with Adidas, and was working with all these huge brands. The fact that someone like him isn't being used in any type of way, to the point where no one's even reached out to him and said, "Oh, look, I'd like to pick your brain on something," it's just crazy to me. And when I look at how I approach things for HoopsFix, before I did the HoopsFix All-Star Classic, I met with Matthew Ryder, one of the co-founders of Rough and Ready, and said, "Look, I want to do an event. Obviously, you ran the most successful event in the country for 6 years or whatever it was. What did you learn? Like, what are the things that you can tell me that is going to help me?" And that conversation was massively useful. Like, later this year, like I want to look at doing sort of a live, like a live panel show, and I've been sort of brainstorming some ideas and stuff. And before I do that, I'm going to be reaching out to, there's certain people, there's a couple of guys that do a podcast, 4 Point Play podcast, sort of an NBA focused podcast in the UK, and they've been doing live shows and they've been selling tickets to it. And so I'll be hitting them up and asking them how they do that, what they think that, what they've learned from it. And that's where I think that the federations have been going massively wrong. And instead, they're coming in and they're doing surveys and like these kind of research focus groups or whatever, when it's like, well, why don't you just speak to people that have actually done it? Like, go to those people and say, okay, this is what we're trying to do. How can we do it? Or hire them, even better, hire them. Because the other thing, right, is if you hire basketball people that everyone knows, everyone's going to be on side because they know them, and they're going to give them a chance, and that's going to give you so much more leverage. Obviously, and I'm not saying that this is what I want to do, but if I was to be, GB or Basketball England's media liaison, all of a sudden, like, my job becomes very easy because I know everyone in the space that I need to speak to. They're going to reach out to me and be like, "Oh, can you push this on GB channels or whatever?" They know that I'm going to do it. And it just makes that whole process a lot easier, rather than, bringing in outsiders that have then got to build those relationships. People have got to trust them, know that they're going to be around long term. Like, it's a whole host of things,
Is the governance a massive issue in terms of the fact that you've now got the BBF is its own thing, you've got the BBL, which is effectively the 12 club owners, you've got England basketball, you've got Scotland Wales, and I know there's a big thing about GB. Does that, because everyone's almost pulling in different directions, that's a huge issue, isn't it? Massive issue.
And I've been saying for a long time that the biggest thing is that, especially when you're talking about on a federation level, they need to amalgamate as one, so that it can stop being an us versus them. And even now, like, after the takeover or whatever, there is still like this whole like us versus them, and what resources GB getting. Barcelona England now going to be focusing on younger national team. Like it's just so stupid. And when you're talking about bringing in commercial revenue, the easiest way to sell the sport would be to sell the whole sport. It's like, okay, do you know what? You're going to be like the face of British basketball, the brand of British basketball in this country, and for X amount of money, you're going to own the BBL, the national leagues, the national teams, like the whole freaking lot. And across that, to think that isn't going to be, pretty decent, like view numbers, reach, penetration, it's crazy. So that is, the infighting and the politics is, everyone knows, has been one of the biggest things that's held back the sport over the years, and it still does, unfortunately. Like it's crazy. The BBL pretty much does its own thing, and even then, there was the new license that was put in. When was that? 2 years ago. The renewed license, the 10-year license, was put in place by the BBF. But now it's like the BBF don't really have any staff. Who's actually managing that? Who's actually liaising with the BBL and being like, okay, are you doing these things? It's just the way it's always been. Everyone's just working their own little separate silos. I don't think the BBL didn't do the ticketing for the most recent GB games again, which the one thing the BBL has proven that they've always been able to do in recent years is sell tickets. Why would the GB not use them? There's just stuff like that. It's just so stupid.
Yeah, obviously one of the GB games was in Manchester, and obviously I do a lot of work around the Manchester clubs, and it's, they don't even ask for the help of the clubs to help shift tickets for it, and it's just like, surely that's a bread and butter sort of suggestion, but ties in with the overall politics. Before I want to have a little talk before I let you go, Sam, about the style of media coverage in basketball and what we perceive as, where do we feel that basketball needs more stuff. So I'll let you know my views on this.
Yeah.
Obviously, your site's brilliant. You cover everything from top to bottom, and you're you're obviously a very pro basketball guy. What surprises me most about basketball is you don't see, the sort of content you see bread and butter in football and rugby and other sports, like coach says this, player says that. You don't really see a lot of that in basketball. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because there's this perception that basketball's got to produce trendy urban content rather than the traditional type stuff?
I think part of it is that there's just a lack of understanding from not only the audience but also the journalists, right? They just don't get it. So I would say that the level of coverage, what people talk about, when you talk about the BBC or the Daily Mail or whatever, the sort of the mainstream media, when they do sort of any type of coverage of basketball, first of all, just the language is all wrong. When you read something, and you're just like, this person's got no idea about basketball. So there's that. There was I don't know whether it was around the NBA game. I think it was around the NBA game. Like the BBC did a game report, and it was just horrific, like just so bad. And then the flip side of that, the other thing, and this has always been a personal bugbear of mine, is it always has to come back to football. Everything has to come back to football. When the NBA comes down, all the PR companies, the way that they get coverage is to partner with football clubs, take the NBA players to the football ground, have the NBA player doing some shots at goal or whatever, bringing one of the football players to a basketball court. It's all focused on celebrities that are courtside. It's actually just not focused on the basketball, and to me that is mega frustrating. But like the storyline thing, and not focus on he said, she said, whatever, it's a tough one, because me and Bradley, who obviously works with me on HoopsFix stuff, we've discussed this all the time, where it's like, on some level, we feel like people don't care. Like, we need to make people care. So it's like we could write a story about stuff where, if someone tweets something after a game that's particularly outlandish, in any other sport that would be blown up about, like, oh my goodness, like, this star criticizes the refs and criticizes the league and this and that, and everyone's into it. But it's like we've experimented with stuff like that before, and no one reads it, and no one cares about it. And I do think part of that is because they don't actually have the wider context of like the storylines of the league and how much of a star Justin Robinson is or whatever. The example I always give, and I've said this a few times on podcasts, is when Drew Sullivan signed with the London Lions. I was like, this is the GB captain. He's coming home to play at home for the first time, 5 minutes from where he grew up. A year, or it was a year after the Olympics. It was like close to the Olympics. It's like this is the kind of story that in any mainstream sport would be picked up and lapped up by the media. Went to the press conference and there was just basically no one there. And then I did a video thinking, it's going to do good, like little voiceover piece. And it's just, it's still on YouTube now. It's probably done like 100 views, 200 views. And again, and this is where like the sport struggles. It's like, for me, bearing in mind that everything I do for HoopsFix is subsidized through my freelance work, I have to think about time, energy, resource. And it's like, what if I'm doing something that's taking just as long as something else, or it's taking hours of my time, and the end result is going to be like 10 people watching it? Is it that good spent? Is that a good way to spend my time? And I think that's it's the same with the mainstream media. So because of the podcast, because I have access to legitimate, in context, British basketball stars, one of the things that we wanted to do was set up our own PR newswire and basically take quotes from any interview that we do and distribute it to mainstream media and say, these are the quotes, like, do what you want. Like, even if we write sort of a basic sort of press release style, they can copy and paste it, whatever. All we want is just a mention that he was talking on the HoopsFix podcast or whatever. And I spoke to the chief. I think he's the chief sports writer of the Press Association, and just asked him, like, what's the best way of going about it? Do you think there would be any interest? And he just said, like, to be honest, it's just no interest in British basketball. We can never get our stuff picked up by any of the mainstream news. Like, if I were you, I'd focus on the NBA. And it's just, and obviously to hear that is pretty demoralizing in the sense of, like, this is my life's work. And it's just like, no one cares about it. But also it's motivating in a way of just like, okay, well, if people don't care, like, we need to make them care. And that's why, like, we need to do those stories, even if there's certain things we do, even though they're not going to do major views, just because it's important to do. And that is something, like, if I had all the resources in the world, like, if I, like, obviously, that we're working on this software product, like Mason, if that goes like I want it to go, to the point where it's bringing enough money for me to pay myself and bring on someone full time, I would bring on a full time writer, and they would just spend that entire day just churning out story. Like, I don't know if you're in the National League, Nick Lewis and Zaire Taylor were going out on Twitter over the weekend, and that's the kind of thing where it's like, we should cover that, because it's funny as to the rivalry between the teams. It makes people more interested next time two teams play each other. But it does come down to time, energy, and resource. But it's something that needs to be done. It's like, I see it as our job, and I don't just mean us as HoopsFix. I mean us collectively as the British basketball world, to make people care, to, like, find the stories that are going to make people care, extract them and put them in a way that people enjoy them and can appreciate them, even if they're not basketball fans.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting saying about people care, because I've sort of, obviously having worked within clubs, I've made this point where, your season ticket holder base in basketball is probably a reversal of what it is in football and rugby. So whereas a crowd might 85% season ticket holders in football, in basketball it's more like 15%. And then the other thing that I notice is, obviously you might have played away on the Friday night and you play at home on the Sunday. Majority of people who are in the arena on the Sunday haven't even got a clue that you played on the Friday or if you won. And, obviously obviously Giants started this season winning pretty much all their away games and struggling to win at home. And it was like, people were probably thinking they were struggling because they were losing the home games, when in fact they were doing really well because they were winning away from home. And it's almost, how do you get it on people's conscience, if you know what I mean, that they know that, okay, yeah, Manchester basketball, they played at Glasgow last week and they lost, but then they played on Sunday and they won. And I suppose all you can do is keep banging the drum and hope that eventually, that care base increases.
Yeah, for sure. That is like, I can't remember who I was having this conversation with, but saying exactly the same thing, where it's like, if you go to a game and you speak to any randomer from the crowd, most of them couldn't even name you any of the players. Like it's just like, oh, I've got some free time. Oh, I saw there was a basketball game on. I'm going to go down. And if what you say, like, I don't know the figures, you would know better than me. But if on average in the BBL it's 15% of ticket holders, that basically means that you got 15% of the crowd that actually have a clue like what's going on. Like they have a clue that, you know, whoever's at the top of the league, you know, this is where we are. This is what our leading scorer is. You know, that team has this person who's a very good player. Everyone else is coming in completely blind. And so it's like, you know, yeah, there's a big education piece. For me, that comes down to content. It's like you just got to be banging out content pieces after content pieces. And then also, like, I guess on the game, you know, on the game day announcer, you know, and the programs and stuff like that, it's like giving people as much context as possible to explain, you know, who they should be keeping an eye on and stuff. But yeah, it's a tough one. Like, but you want those repeat visitors. It's like, how do you turn someone from a casual, I'm going to go and visit this for a Sunday out, to I'm a fan of this team and I'm going to come? Because do you know what? I actually, last night at the Lions game, I remember seeing someone come up next to me in a London Lions jersey, like a fan. And I remember just thinking it was weird. Like, it felt weird, like that they're wearing a London Lions jersey, which is obviously wrong on so many levels. Like, it shouldn't be weird, because if I saw someone wearing a West Ham football kit, I wouldn't even bat an eyelid. But yeah, like, you just, and you know, I remember a couple of years ago, first going to Leicester when they first built their venue, and I got out of the train station and was walking through the streets, and I saw someone wearing like a Leicester Riders like beanie or scarf or something, and I just remember being like, that is so weird. Like, someone that's actually a fan of the team and, like, you know, buys merchandise and stuff. But yeah, it's a tough one. Like, it is such a tough one. I don't know what the answers are. Like,
is there something that the joined up thinking could maybe put together in terms of, you know, obviously we talked about the federations being separate, but, you know, imagine you had a database of every person that had ever watched British basketball, and centrally they got an email every week, or there was a bulletin every week that basically said, look, this is what's happening in British basketball, this is who's top of the league, this is who's... Is that the sort of thing that it needs, the joined up thinking across the whole thing? Yeah,
like, well, for sure. I do think there are some people that are interested in the BBL and not going to be interested in national leagues, or not be interested in, you know, whatever. So, but I mean, obviously, you know about this. Like, you can easily segment lists so that you put down your interests or whatever, and you get served content based on just that. But, you know, I said to a few people, like, I listened to Make 'em Take 'em, the podcast with Mark Mills and Chris Mays, and to me, that has been such a blessing. Just because I love podcasts, I consume way too much of them, but because it's a secondary activity, I can do other things whilst I'm listening to it. So when I'm cooking or when I'm cleaning or whatever, it's like I can have them in my ears when I go to the gym. And sometimes, well, every week I listen to that because it gives me an idea of what's going on. It's like, okay, cool, this is what happened this weekend. These are the key storylines. You know, this is where people are in the standings. Is there any key injuries or departures or whatever it might be? And it's like, the accessibleness of that is the kind of stuff where it's like, well, the more of that you have, the better it is for the game. Like, even so, the thing I put up with Paul Blake is, you know, it's a new format that I want to start experimenting with, where I'm in the studio and I do a call in and kind of we explore a topic with an expert or authority on whatever it is that we want to talk about. But I was just like, and the feedback on it has been really, really positive. And you know, I'm just like, well, for example, if I was to do, one of the ideas I'm floating at the moment is like, the top 10 moments in British Basketball League history, which none of us have got a clue about. All of us could tell you, like, some of the top moments in the NBA, like, over the years. None of us have got any idea. So it's like, well, all of a sudden, it's like, if I bring on Routledge and we talk for 10 minutes and he just runs through, okay, these are the key, these are the biggest moments in BBL history, and intersperse that with a bit of footage or whatever, which, like, that's there forever now. People can easily access it. People can easily access it, and it gives them context on, like, what's going on now. You know, the other thing, obviously there's been a lot of talk of, like, the London rivalry and whether it's like Towers and Leopards back in the day and stuff, and it's like, well, we should do something around that. So if someone wants to look at, like, what the Towers Leopards rivalry is like and then compare it to the Royals and the Lions now, they can do that. It's all that stuff that gives it context, that makes it interesting. Like, you know, someone having 20 points isn't that interesting. But if it's the first time that player's ever had 20 points, or the first time they've done this, this, and this, and this, it's suddenly like, oh, this is actually like a big deal, you know. That's why all the stuff that Routledge does with his stats and his spreadsheets and stuff is so interesting, because you just find out all this information about, like, oh wow, that's a big deal for that player, or a big deal for that team.
Yeah, I mean, basketball, certainly from a statistical point of view, is probably unrivaled, maybe, in terms of the depth. And I know obviously at Manchester they do a lot of work on performance analysis and scouting, because, you know, pretty much every basketball game in the world, you've got this incredible depth of stat that you can turn around and turn into anything. You know, you can see who's the best 3-point shooter in the league. You can see who's got the best, you know, who does the most steals. You know, you only have to see the headlines out of games that, you know, especially in Manchester, obviously we've got Willie Clayton doing 20 points, 20 rebounds every week, and it's just like, it's a phenomenal sort of asset 100%. That maybe isn't utilised enough.
Well, 100%. Like, the fact that, like, those are the nuggets that give relevancy to the media when they're covering things. Is like, oh, that's what we want to include. And, you know, one of my big bugbears with the BBL still is the website. I just hate the website. It's just so, they did the redesign, like, however many, a couple of years ago or whatever, and I think it was with Sporting Pulse, but it's just like, to find the information that you want is next to impossible, and just the whole thing is just so horrible from a UX standpoint.
Yeah. And SEO as well. It's very hard. You know, in theory, it should be fairly straightforward to search for a player, and, you know, the top. If you put into Google Justin Robinson or even Willie Clayton, the BBL website should be up there with a permanent. You know, you could feasibly have every single player that's ever played in Britain have a profile page on British basketball, which then, like you say, builds the context, builds the history, builds the records. Yeah,
100%. Like, if I was the BBL right now with any budget that I had, I'd be like, cool, I'm putting down 10, 20 grand with someone that knows what they're doing, you know, that knows, like, that's worked with basketball teams, organisations, basketball leagues before, that's got examples of portfolio and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do to make it so much better than it is. Because I basically don't really go to the BBL website. You know, I've pretty much stay up to date on social media and with live stats and stuff, and then obviously I get all the press releases as well, actually, so it all comes in my inbox, so I don't actually, you know, but yeah, there is, like, if they made the website more interesting with better content, more user friendly, I do think that they would get a massive increase in traffic.
Yeah, because I mean, I must admit, like you say, the only pages I ever go on is the live stats, and obviously that in theory isn't, you know, that's not part of the BBL website anyway. You might accidentally end up on the BBL website via it somehow, but like you say, if you wanted to find something out, it's a very laborious sort of process, isn't it?
The amount of times, like, I will go on the site and just be looking for something and can't find it, and I have to message someone and be like, oh, is this on the website? Yeah, it's here, you got to go to this, go to this, go to this. And it's like, well, the fact that I even have to ask means that it's not that well set up.
Especially when, obviously, you're switched on to basketball and you know what you're looking for, when, you know, the whole, like with what we're saying, we're trying to increase this 15% or whatever the figure is. So, yeah. Sam, really interesting to speak to you. Thanks for your insight. Hopefully we won't be having this conversation again in 5 years, and hopefully someone gets it sorted out.
I pray. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, mate.